So if you read today's description for this reflection, you would see that I have four names that I have listed as part of this reflection. And you might think, well, that's a lot of people to talk about. And it certainly doesn't reflect 3 points. It's rather maybe 4 points. But the truth of this, all of these folks come together, for me at least, as I looked at today's readings, particularly the reading of Paul to the Ephesians. And he writes in that lovely letter about being sealed with the promise of the Holy Spirit. And of course, what Paul is referring to there is baptism. The fact that through baptism, we are given the gifts and the grace of the Spirit. And Paul understood for the Ephesians and for us that being a follower of Jesus is sometimes challenging. It's hard. We may feel that we don't have what it takes to be his follower. But Paul says, yes, you do. And yes, you can. Because each of us are filled with the promise of the Holy Spirit who will help us to find the way. Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. She lived in the 17th century. She was born to a very rich family. They had many children, but she was their only daughter. And they lived in the Burgundy region of France. Today is her feast day. As a young child, Margaret Mary was quiet, reflective, somewhat withdrawn. She eventually, after a lot of things happening in her life, she eventually enters the convent, the Sisters of the Visitation. And as a nun, she was known to be kind and compassionate, a helpful member of the community. But there were many in the community that were not that happy with her, and they didn't think she had what it took to be a nun. Actually, she was given a job in the infirmary, and truth be told, she really didn't do a good job there. But Margaret Mary Alacoque had a deep, deep desire in her heart to be close to Jesus. Her prayer life was rich and deep, and it was in the time of prayer that she received revelations from God, from Jesus himself, about the Sacred Heart, about how his Sacred Heart was filled with mercy and love and goodness and care for every human person, no matter who they were, no matter how much they may have doubted themselves or others thought they weren't worthy of being a disciple. At first, the women in the convent did not believe she was having these revelations, but over a period of time, people came to believe Margaret Mary Alacoque. And because of Margaret Mary Alacoque, the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus deepened and continued in the centuries that followed. On this very day, in 1978, Karol Wojtyła stands on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. 200,000 people are standing below, and they have just heard the news that he has been elected the next pope, and he has taken the name John Paul II as the name he will use in his pontificate. He had a very lovely informal conversation with the people below in that moment. And he told them that he was very afraid to say yes after he was nominated to take the office of Pope. But he said he did it in obedience to the Lord. Throughout his long pontificate, John Paul II would always keep his heart close to the heart of Jesus. And in his ministry as Pope, he always helped people understand that there is more mercy in the heart of Jesus than we could ever imagine, more love and care for all of us. 70 years ago today, C.S. Lewis published his book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's a great children's book. It's a beloved book. And it reflects, as all of his books do, or most of his books do, Lewis's deep religious faith, his own theology. In many books, not this one in particular, but in many of his books, he writes about what he has learned regarding faith, particularly in the moments when his heart was broken, when his heart was filled with grief. It was in those moments that C.S. Lewis came to understand that the heart of God is filled with compassion and care and strength. He once wrote, though our feelings come and go, God's love for us does not. So, that brings me to the last person that I'd like to talk about today, and it's C.Bosseron Chambers. This picture is his creation. He is the artist that painted this image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He is an American artist from the 20th century. He died in 1964. As a young man, he studied art in Berlin and in Vienna. He is sometimes called the Norman Rockwell of Catholic art, because if you look him up, do it on the internet. If you look him up, you will see the various religious paintings that he created, and you're going to say, I've seen these before. I've seen them before on prayer cards and prayer books, perhaps framed on a wall somewhere. And many of his religious paintings, they focus on the light and this unfailing grace of God, the promise of the Holy Spirit, if you will, emanating towards us. And if you look at this picture of the Sacred Heart, the heart of Jesus is not graphically portrayed there. Rather, there is a sense of the light that is coming from his chest toward the person who is looking at it. The sense of the promise of the Holy Spirit coming from the heart of Jesus, filled with mercy, with love, and with the care that we need to really be his disciple. So that's how Margaret Mary Alacoque, John Paul II, C.S. Lewis, and C.Bosseron Chambers all wind up in a reflection for a Friday. But this is more than a lesson on the spiritual life or literature or art. On this Friday, I am thinking about all of you. And I'm thinking about your hearts. What's in your heart right now, today? Do you have some joy, some great good news that it's filling you up with this sense of wonder and grace? Is there some hope that's in your heart that's keeping you steady, especially as we face yet an uncertain future? Is there in your heart at this hour perhaps some fear, some worry that's really kind of hurting your heart a little bit? Is there a grief that you're carrying? Wherever your heart is today, that is where the Lord is meeting you. That is where St. Paul says to the Ephesians and says to us that we need to be reminded that we are sealed with the promise of the Holy Spirit, that the Lord's heart will carry us and continue to care for us as we make this journey of faith. So wherever your heart is right now, wherever you're thinking about, I want you to stop and say those words over and over again. We are sealed with the promise of the Holy Spirit. We are sealed with the promise of the Holy Spirit, because that promise is given to us no matter who we are, no matter where we are, no matter what we are facing, what we're celebrating, what we're deciding. We are told today from these four individuals from different times and different places that God's heart, the heart of Jesus, is always open to every one of us. All we have to do is open our heart to him.